Everyone, it's great. It's my pleasure to see your all bushes today around. I've been myself Bush School students, Bush School student, alumni of class 2016. So it's really my greatest pleasure to be again with European Horizons. We did once an event back in 2016 already with the help of Professor Gabriel Marin Thornton. So it's really great to be back again. I am representing Baltic Security Foundation. I also do analysis for Jamestown Foundation. And now I give floor to my colleague, Otto.
Thank you very much, Bianca. Thank you very much, Oleg. It is great to be here with this fantastic opportunity for all of us provided by the European Horizons and the Bush School. And I think it is a great continuation of the work that we have been doing in raising the awareness of different issues of our collective security concerns. And this NATO Summit simulation will certainly be one of them. So similarly, like Mr. Nickers, I'm also working for the Baltic Security Foundation, where we give particular focus on these different security challenges that the Baltic states and the Baltic Sea region has. But of course, if we look at the security picture, especially the one that we will be discussing today, that is not only the Baltic Sea region. If we talk about European security and transatlantic security, then of course, in terms of NATO, we have also other parts of the alliance, such as Europe, and also the very important concerns that our transatlantic partners, Canada and the United States, have. And I think this will be a very good chance to show some of these aspects and gain additional knowledge, especially as we go further with the particular details of the scenario that we will play today. So that would be my introduction. Thank you.
My name is David Kanan. I'm an adjunct professor at the Bush School and its presence in Washington, D.C. I teach a course on national security. I have an interest in NATO going back many, many years to my time as an analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency. And given all the stresses in Europe, the debates about the future of the alliance and its purpose, I'm just serving in a consulting capacity here, and I look forward to seeing what you folks come up with.
Great. So I guess with that, we can, as people start to trickle in, we can kind of do the beginning phases of just introducing kind of what NATO is, kind of how it works as a collective security force, and really just kind of introduce the concept of NATO. I don't know if you guys have a presentation prepared for us today, but that would be great if we can get started.
Thank you, Alina. Let me propose the following order for the presentation. I will start with some opening remarks with regard to the general history of NATO and what it means. Then I would like to give floor to Mr. Oleg Snickers, who will tell us more about the Washington Treaty, Articles 4 and 5, and some bit more specifics about the operation of NATO, as he has had extensive experience in this while working in the Latvian Ministry of Defense. And then perhaps I would like to give the floor again to Professor Kanin to give some additional comments with regard to what we have already presented. And after these remarks, I would like to present the scenario that we will be playing with, and explain the rules of the game that hopefully we'll be able to do next week, and the roles of the participants in it. So if that is all right, then let me begin a little bit with the introduction of what NATO is and what will be the basic facts that we are working with. And of course, if we look at the history, we have to see the aftermath of World War II in Europe to understand how NATO came about. And here you had a situation where the former allies, the victors of World War II, were in such new situation, especially with regard to the future of Germany, with regard to the future of Europe, that was one of the reasons that led to the previous or former friends becoming the new enemies just after their victory over Nazi Germany. And one of the main precursors there was the Berlin Blockage, which was at that time divided between the four occupying powers, but the Berlin itself was surrounded by the Soviet occupation zone. And it was used as a point of pressure from the Soviet side to try to assert its power in Central Europe. That, of course, was not something that the Western allies wanted to go forward, and they also did not want for a conventional conflict to break out, especially on terms that wouldn't be favorable to them. If we see the situation in Europe after the war, much of the continent was ruined by the continuous warfare. There were only a few countries that were neutral, so most countries in the continent were affected by a war. That was also something that we saw in Latvia, the very terrible results of the war. And that is also something that countries such as the United States were not immune from, especially as we see the effects of the war that happened in the Pacific, and then afterwards the American presence in Europe, helping to liberate it from the Nazi Germany. So as after World War II, you had the change of this major geopolitical arrangement, and we saw a relative demise of France and the United Kingdom, especially if we look at the Middle East, and we saw the rise, the definite rise of the United States, and then also the Soviet Union, and this dyad, or this very challenging relationship, was also determined by the specific part of the arsenal, specifically nuclear weapons. Of course, with the United States being the first ones who had it, and then the Soviet Union, who, thanks to both their scientific research and also some quite effective spying, they were able also to get on the bandwagon of this competition, and this helped the Soviets to try to put themselves as the opponent to the United States in the way how the decisions on the global order should be set. So in 1949, the countries led by United States and Western European allies decided to establish a formal collective security arrangement, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And this organization was established with the Washington Treaty, which was signed in the American capital right in 1949. So that happened just a year after the Berlin Blockade. And that was also something that went in parallel with some processes that we saw in European integration. For example, the Western European Union and the Western European attempts to organize themselves in fear of presumed Soviet further advance into Central Europe and Western Europe. So since 1949, as NATO was established, it has been the strongest military alliance in the world. It was, of course, first of all, challenged by the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. So that was the answer from the Eastern Bloc of how to try to balance out the superiority of NATO. But between 1949 and 1991, this format and this arrangement was one of the main sources of dynamism or stability in the international system. And whereas initially NATO consisted of United States, Canada, and a few Western European countries, it did not take long for it to expand. And one of the most significant expansions already by between 1952 and 1955, that was the NATO expansion that included Italy and Western Germany, which was an important shift in this understanding. If we remember what happened at the United Nations back in 1945, Germany and Italy, together with Japan, were excluded from this new global arrangement. At the same time, the Soviet threat was significant enough for Americans, Canadians, and Western Europeans to find a new format of relationship with Italy and Western Germany, and understand that, well, if we go this new way, if we establish a democratic and integrated Western society, then of course security has to be paramount and security has to work. And of course, if you would take Germany separately or Italy separately or any of the Western European countries separately, they wouldn't be able to win a conventional war against the Soviet Union, which was one of the reasons why the Western Europeans were so keen to join in. Later on, we saw the expansion of the alliance, but probably the biggest recent expansion happened after the end of the Cold War, because that was the period of time when the countries in Central and Eastern Europe who regained their independence, they decided for most part to follow this Western European or the Western in general order of foreign policy, which was one of the reasons why you had 10 countries from Central and Eastern Europe that joined the Europe in 2004 and 29 and also 2004. And we have seen some additions to our collective since. But it is covering almost all of the European part of the world, and also most of the European Union member states are also NATO member states, which is also one of the factors when we talk about European security and how it is dealt in the terms of European integration. So after this brief run through the history and major points in NATO's development, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Olav Snickers to tell more about the Washington Treaty and specifics on the operations and cooperation within the organization.
Thank you, Otto. So I will turn my presentation on. If you could enable screen sharing for me. So I can't share the screen. Anybody?
Does that work now?
Yeah, thanks. So in this presentation, I will walk you through the operational aspects of NATO, the cases when Article 4 and 5 were actually put into force. Then we will take a look on Russian recent military buildup and what are NATO immediate response to these developments for the planning of forces and regional defense planning. Presentation will be concluded by a brief overview of relations between NATO and Belarus, and I hope this will help for the simulation exercise. So, if we go to Article 4, Article 4 calls for consultation over military matters when the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of any of the parties is threatened. Article 4 has been invoked 4 times by Turkey in 2003 over the Iraq War, in June 2012 after the shooting down of a Turkish military jet by Syria, then again in October 2012 after Syrian attacks on Turkey and their counter-attacks, and in February 2020 amid increasing tensions as part of the northwestern Syria offensive. An Article 4 meeting was invoked as well by Latvia and Poland in March 2014 as a response to the Crimean crisis. On July 2015, Turkey again referred to Article 4 in response to the Suruk bombing, which is attributed to ISIS, and other security issues along its southern border. The next day, United States announced through the New York Times that it had already agreed in general terms on a plan that envisions American warplanes, Syrian insurgents and Turkish forces working together to sweep ISIS militants from a 60-mile long strip of northern Syria along the Turkish border. On long-range artillery could be also used across the border. So let's go to the Article 5 now. Actually, Article 5 has been invoked only once in NATO history by United States after the September 11 attacks in 2001. The invocation was confirmed October 4, 2001, when NATO determined that the attacks were indeed eligible under the terms of the North Atlantic Treaty. 8 official actions taken by NATO in response to 9/11 attacks included the Operation Eagle Assist and Operation Active Endeavour, a naval operation in the Mediterranean, which was designed to prevent the movement of terrorists or weapons of mass destruction, as well as enhancing the security of shipping in general. Active Endeavour began already in October 4 and 2001. Then in April 2003, NATO agreed to take command of the International Security Assistance Force ISAF operation in Afghanistan, which concluded troops from 42 countries. The decision came at the request of Germany and the Netherlands, the two states leading ISAF at the time of agreement, and all 19 NATO ambassadors approved it unanimously. The handover of control to NATO took place already in August 2003 and marked the first time in NATO's history that it took charge of a mission outside the North Atlantic area, as much as it refers to the Article 6 of the treaty. Early in October 2001, NATO Secretary General Lord Robertson held a press conference to discuss the events of September 11 and pledged support of the 18 NATO allies in the campaign against international terrorism. Though Article 5 has only been officially invoked once, NATO has taken collective defensive measures in other situations as well, including deploying missiles to the border of Turkey and Syria in 2012, then Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, and the rise of ISIS, which has led the organization to implement a huge increase in its collective defenses, including tripling the size of NATO response force. Now let's move closer to Russia and the NATO eastern flank. Here we see that despite the global coronavirus pandemic, Moscow is taking steps to modify its combat training and military exercises, as well as further strengthen the Western military district. So you see the light blue area on the Russia's map. While tensions with the transatlantic alliance will continue for foreseeable future, Moscow has continued to strengthen the Western military district as well as hold tactical maneuvers close to NATO borders. The Russian Defense Ministry reported a separate guards motorized rifle Sevastopol Red Banner Brigade, named after the 16th anniversary of the founding of the Soviet Union, to be included in the army of the Western Military District. This brigade is relatively well equipped with modern weapons and specialist equipment, including modern tanks, armored personnel, carriers, BPM, 3 combat vehicles, as well as air defense systems. The Russian Baltic exercise last year featured single and group attacks against targets, simulating missile launchers, airfields, defended objects, and command posts of a conditional enemy. While Russian armed forces are highly centralized over the Western Military District, NATO forces and its command structure is rather fragmented, and its ability to be utilized heavily depends on political decision, which is quite challenging process of reaching unanimity across all the NATO members. This vulnerability was addressed after Russia's aggression in Crimea, and here we see the instruments of basic instrument of NATO rapid response, which is namely a very high readiness joint task force, VGTF. And the VGTF is so-called a spearhead force able to deploy at short notice to threats against NATO sovereignty. And this move answered the challenge how the nations would respond to an attack of any sort in those critical hours and perhaps days before NATO is fully. VGTF is formed of a land brigade numbering around 5,000 troops, supported by air, sea, and special forces. VGTF is supported by 2 more land brigades as a rapid reinforcement capability in case of a major crisis. Altogether, the enhanced NATO response force amount around 30,000 troops. NATO members are taking turns heading the VGTF. Poland led VGTF in 2020, Germany in 2019, and Italy had rotational control of the force in 2018. This year, the Turkish army took the lead of NATO Very Heaviness Joint Task Force, built around Turkey's 66th Mechanized Infantry Brigade of around 4,200 troops, a total around of 6,400 soldiers, which will serve on the VGTF, and units from Albania, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, Montenegro, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Spain, the UK, and the United States will also serve on the force, which is part of the alliance, a larger NATO response force. Turkey has made substantial investments into this unit, amongst the most mobile in NATO, particularly in its logistics and ammunition requirements, planning the latest models of Turkish armed vehicles, anti-tank missiles, and howitzers have been allocated to this force. But it was very recently when it was actually Turkey who compromised NATO's cohesion for the eastern flank. As we remember, it was the London Summit last year, and during the London Summit early 2019 supported the updated Polish Baltic defense plan, which was blocked by Turkey from December 2019 until July 2020, when NATO has fully approved the renewed plans of the Baltic states and Poland after a compromise was found with Turkey. Turkey was the only country to refuse to approve the Baltic and Polish defense plans until its interests were taken into account. In demand to classify Kurdish militants in northern Syria as a terrorist groups. So this situation very vividly shows the possible scenarios when a quick and rapid reaction and decisions should be made by the NATO. But it can be very difficult. It's luckily not for the situation of imminent crisis for the Baltics, but this situation last year and 2 years ago with Turkey shows that there can be challenges with particular NATO members to succeed. This unanimity required for NATO to take its action. More coherent approach to the Baltics defense are still a serious challenge for NATO planners when single operational region, as Russia it sees the Baltic region, is split into three different parts from the side of the Baltic countries. As it was concluded in the Baltic Security Strategy report back in 2019, a NATO enhanced forward presence, EFP deterrence posture, reinforces the split among three separate EFP headquarters and channel EFP allied contributors to individual countries rather than supporting the region as a whole. This may appear fine as a deterrent posture and for nice to have cooperation, but it would be a total mess if forces actually have to fight. NATO leadership is still not supporting change to the command and control arrangements in the pre-conflict stages. The lesson from Ukraine about political centralization of command being too slow to match Russian actions have not been properly addressed. The NATO structures now put in place actually serve to make interoperability and proper military cooperation across all the three countries near impossible. NATO and contributing allies also need to grasp that uncertainty avoidance affects the political level equally as much as the military. So this situation over the particular Baltic region and challenges of command and control and the fragmented nature of this matter is very relevant to the NATO operation as a whole. This is not. It's a more let's say global issue for NATO than only Baltic region, I think. And politicians need plans and prior direction as much as military leaders if they are to be effective. And the current posture actually creates instability and uncertainty and will likely contribute to a decision-making failure at the highest level of the three states unless taken seriously. So NATO needs to focus hard upon its overall command structures and the actual fighting and support structures on the ground used by member countries. There needs to be a greater focus upon the pre-Article 5 stages of political decision-making and how all three countries interact in cooperation with each other, NATO and non-NATO allies. On the surface, it appears that too much is left to chance, national public relations, and uncoordinated bilateral cooperation. The key challenge for all the Baltic regional states and both NATO and European Union is to move deterrence from, I would say, political to a military framework. EFP reinforcements into the region are valuable, but they do not represent a coherent fighting force. Their purpose is to deter Russia and to demonstrate to the potential aggressor the readiness to trigger the 30,000 strong rapid reaction force and full-scale NATO counter-assault, which is, of course, very nice to have. Deterrence by military strengths is simply absent at present both within the 3 Baltic states and the region in general, despite the EFP reinforcements. There is too much political focus on grand plans and too little upon facing the stark reality of a battle with Russian forces. Perhaps this by the bizarre divisional headquarters to be set off in Denmark. In this configuration, if it cannot be called a divisional headquarters in any definition of the term, it has no operational mobility and no divisional military strengths or fighting ability at all. But it serves to convince politicians that something is being done. Secondly, all 4 multinational groups are under command of the headquarters Multinational Corps Northeast, based in Poland's Szczecin, while another Polish city, Elblag, hosts the headquarters 32nd Multinational Division Northeast, which coordinates and supervises training and preparation activities of these forces. This complex organizational mess both hides the stark reality of regional operational weaknesses and stops any potential development in a proper military direction for war. So here we reached Belarus itself. I will just briefly outline Belarus relations with NATO. So relations with NATO started for Belarus already in 1992, when Belarus joined the North Atlantic Cooperation Council. This forum for dialogue was succeeded in 1997 by the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council, which brings together all allies and partner countries in the Euro-Atlantic area. Dialogue is facilitated by the existence of Belarus diplomatic mission to NATO, which was opened in 1988. Bilateral cooperation began when Belarus joined the Partnership for Peace program, PFP program, in 1995. Under the PFP, NATO and Belarus are developing practical cooperation in a number of areas through the individual partnership and cooperation program APCP between NATO and Belarus. On the basis of the IPCP, Belarusian personnel are attending courses in NATO countries, and practical cooperation is being developed in areas such as civil preparedness, crisis management, arms control, air defense, and air traffic control, telecommunications and information processing, as well as language training and military education. NATO allies have expressed their concern at the lack of progress in democratic reforms in Belarus. Nonetheless, NATO allies believe that keeping open channels of communication, practical cooperation and dialogue is the best interest of regional security. NATO allies have been closely watching the developments unfolding in Belarus since August 2020. The Secretary General has called on the Belarusian authorities to demonstrate full respect for human rights, including freedom of speech and the right to peaceful protest. He has underlined that it's for the people of Belarus to determine their future, and all allies support a foreign and independent Belarus. NATO poses no threat to the country and has no military buildup in the region, which is quite frequently expressed by NATO side so far. This ends my presentation now. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivs. Thank you, Otto. I think now we will move on to speak a little bit about the scenario, correct? We'll kind of present it, and then we can give some background on the history and other aspects of it that you need to know in order to prepare this week, and then for the actual simulation date next Saturday. So the scenario here, which I think it might give a clue to what happened. So following President Lukashenko's election in 2020, protesters contested his inauguration and external actors claimed the election was fraudulent. Amid suspicion of Russian interference and an already complex relationship between Russia and Belarus, Russia deploys troops in Belarus to cement its influence and power. Moscow sees Belarus as a crucial buffer state between itself and NATO planners fear Russian involvement would undermine its role in the country. So Poland and Lithuania call NATO actors to take stronger action in the country in fear that problems in Belarus will somehow spill over into its own borders. So here, Poland and Lithuania call together a NATO summit, which is what we'll be doing on Saturday, on the basis of Article 4 of the Washington Treaty, and proposes the following NATO support for Belarusian opposition: diplomatic support, financial aid, military training, and military equipment. So that is the scenario that we will be, again, discussing right now, and the scenario that we will be playing out next Saturday. So everybody here, we can also, both Otto and Olives will give an explanation about how this is going to work on Saturday and how the different role playing is going to go, that's scheduled for next Saturday with the opening statements and debates, and ultimately how do we reach a unanimous decision. So I'll pass that back.
Thank you, Bianca. So exactly, that is the scenario that we will be playing out, which also explains some of the focuses that you heard in the presentations before. And we will assume that all of the scenario is a fact, that these all statements have indeed taken place. So all of them, including the Russian deployment of troops, and also that the Poland and Lithuania have indeed called for the summit, and it has been approved. It will take place. And in this summit, the countries will discuss whether NATO supports the Belarusian at all, and if it does, whether it provides diplomatic, financial, or military support. And here, you as the participants will have to represent a state, a member state of NATO, and as the representative of the member state, you will have to look at your national position on this. So you will have to look at real documents or materials from media or from wherever that could help you to indicate what your country's position is with regard to this, and what of these proposals by Poland and Lithuania would you support. I think that we should also have enough players that we will also have Poland and Lithuania represented. So we will have actually the proponents of these specific proposals, and then you will have the other countries who may have similar or differing opinions with regard to this. And so the representatives of the countries will have to try to do two contradictory things. On the one hand, you will have to try to represent your national position in the final decision, whatever it is. So you have to remember that you represent your own state, and your position as the prime minister or the foreign minister or the defense minister depends on how well you do in the summit. At the same time, your country is a member state of NATO, and it is important for NATO to have a coherent position on this, to have a decision at the end, and have some kind of consensus, whatever it is. So on the one hand, you have to push your own national interest. At the same time, you have to respect the other interests represented to the extent that it is possible. And so this will be your creativity on the way how you will play this, how you will speak with the other representatives of other countries, and what will be the final decision that will be reached. So I will be the Secretary General, and you will have Mr. Nickers and also Professor Kanin, who will participate, that you will be able to consult with during the proceedings of the summit. And we plan to organize it like that we initiate it with opening statements from each of the countries. So let's try to limit it to 3 minutes so that you would be able to respond to the proposals of Poland and Lithuania, and say in the context of your national interest whether you approve, disapprove, or propose something else in context of that. And so initially, each country will have these 3 minutes each to present the opening statement. And after the opening statement, we will open up a debate so that we would be able to put together these main directions, main schools of thought that we will have out of these opening statements, and we'll try to work out a decision. So for me, as the Secretary General, it will be the interest for NATO to stay coherent and to get to a decision at the end. For you as the member states, it will be important for you to represent your own national interest, at the same time to compromise where necessary to get this decision at the end. So your position should be very realistic to what they are. And so perhaps if you know any of the languages, official languages of the member states, that may help you in the selection of the countries that you will represent. Because then, of course, if you speak, let's say, French or German or Norwegian, then, of course, it will be easier for you to put together your opening statement and understand what the national position of France, Germany, Belgium, or Norway is in this regard. So if I understand correctly, we will share a Google document where you will have the list of the countries. And so the participants will be able to register for their countries there. And once those are selected, those will be the ones that you will represent at the simulation. So I know that we have for simulation, the total amount of time is between, I think it was 3 and 4 hours, but it is not our intention to expend all of this time. The main goal for us is to get to a decision, or perhaps to the understanding that we cannot get a decision, so that we can simulate an actual meeting, and also to play out all these aspects of what the representatives of the states are actually doing, for example, in Brussels. During the debate and perhaps also before it, any representative of any country will have the chance to call for, let's say, 5 or 10 minute break to also negotiate and talk with other countries that are represented at the game. So already in this week's time, you will have the opportunity to do so. So, for example, if you have selected France and there is something that you want to discuss with Poland, Lithuania, Germany, you will have the chance to already do this during your preparation, but also during the simulation, we'll have the chance to ask for breaks so that you can actually play out this talks in the couloirs, so the talks behind the closed doors, so that when you come back to the summit meeting, then perhaps it is easier to achieve one or another objective, especially if you have someone else who would think alike, or with whom you were able to agree on something. So we'll try to keep it as realistic as possible. So would any one of you have any questions or clarification that would be required from our side? We'll be ready to answer now.
And just to make a quick comment, for the next meeting, we're going to ensure that the security of the meeting is, top priority, to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But I appreciate you all working with us and handling it well. We all know that the virtual space has some caveats to it, but yeah, we'll work on that for next time. So thank you for bearing through it.
And as this demonstrates, cybersecurity is also a priority for NATO. So it is not just a mouthpiece or just something to get the government to pay for something. So that is really something which is important. And imagine if it's an issue for us, how much effort is put in, for example, for hackers to try to access NATO databases and the databases and servers of the member countries. So it is indeed a new domain.
Yeah, it really is. So what we will do for all the participants who are here and who are not here, there are a lot more who have signed up. We will share that document. We will also share the document where we lay out the scenario, and there are some recommended reading there. We will also be assigning all of the countries by the end of this weekend. So by Monday morning, they will be assigned so that everybody knows what their countries are. So they have the entire week to research. I don't think we will have enough people to have 2 people per country. And so it will be less collaborative in that sense, but everybody will be researching their own countries, the positions for their countries, the interests, and then on Saturday convene and to have this simulation. So all these materials will be emailed to all the participants. And I think David Cannon had some connection issues. So I don't.
But I think maybe we'll wrap up for today. And if you have any questions, you're free to email me and I can relay any other questions to both Olives and Otto. And we just thank you so much for joining us today. It was great, minus a few hiccups, but we're looking forward to the simulation next Saturday. And yeah, looking forward to continuing working with you on this simulation. I appreciate all of you for coming and I hope you have a great rest of your weekends.
Thank you all. Thank you. Looking forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, see you in a week.
Thank you.